he's petered out.
All right, Tets, you got 45 minutes.
The floor is yours.
All right, I want everybody.
By you have 45 minutes. You and me have 45 minutes.
No. So, talking about going back in history, a long time ago in podcast, the last time I was on, I talked about paints for miniatures, and just kind of we kind of covered some bases on things to look for. We talked a lot about Vallejo versus Citadel, acrylic paints in general. We kind of touched a little bit on techniques. But I thought it'd be interesting to expand a little bit more because there is a lot that you can talk about when it comes to just miniature paints in and of themselves. And there's a lot of techniques. There's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Like pigments and washes and glazes and like these additional things that you can do on top of your basic paint levels. And I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of talk about that. And I didn't know if you guys had any questions about that in general.
Actually, I do. I got a question. What kind of glaze would work best on a donut?
Definitely chocolate, as long as it's filled with Boston cream.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
I would agree with
No.
Yes. That's
No glaze, plain cake.
You could be wrong. It's okay.
I'm with Obs.
Too sugary.
Wow,
No.
Lily, tell us we're right.
Lily, be the tiebreaker.
I like the French curler. Sorry.
Oh God, I married her. I married her.
Hold on. I got an idea. French curler with Boston cream injected in a chocolate frosting.
No. That's called diabetes in a ring.
So that's donuts in general.
You don't want to feel the sugar coat your arteries.
No.
Feel your blood sugar content becoming your blood content.
I know. Actually, I don't really have a full-on real question, but since I have, as I stated before we last time, I think we talked about this. I stopped painting because I've finished the minis I was working on, and I'm probably never going to paint until 2 years from now. But
then this will be information for you. Then
I know, right? I can look back at this podcast and be like, "Wow, there was so much information I can use."
It's an easy number to remember.
This is true. Talking about washes real fast. Using them. Generally, I guess my question, I'm not sure how to phrase this question, so I'm going to try the best I can, and we'll stumble along until I can get clarity to my words.
Okay.
When we're doing a wash and you're trying to fill out the cracks and the crevices and get them on there, is there... Understandably so. The one problem I kind of run into this issue is that there's a lot of times where it sometimes dries, but it's on the open area of it's not really in the cracks, and it means that the clothing itself gets dirty. And I'm not really trying to look for that effect. I'm trying to yeah, it's not pulling in the cracks and the crevices where I want it to be. It's also showing up it's just on the flat surfaces and everything.
So actually, I'm glad you asked this because there's something that I didn't know existed, and it's more for scale modelers than it is for miniature painters for like war games and stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized this was a way I was using my washes. I use my washes to get into the crevices, but I also choose them in such a way where, like, if I'm going to use Nuln Oil, I'm going to make it so that way my model can stand up to the fact that it's having black put all over it. Like, when I do my washes, so I guess going back a little bit, one of the techniques you can do, they call it a pin wash, where you take a very, very fine brush and only apply it to whatever cracks, crevices that you're doing. That's not what I do. I take one of my larger brushes and I load it up and I just go all over the model. And if anything looks like it's pulling up, I will then go behind it with a cotton bud and kind of soak up where things are kind of pooling so that way they don't leave like a giant black spot.
Yeah.
But when you do it that way, the whole thing gets dimmed down because everything now has black over it, right? Like,
yes.
Like the crevices are now black, like true black, but your reds are now this almost
they're like a dull red. You
right.
blues, if you choose like and it really stands out if you're choosing like bright colors like light blue, like an emerald green, or even just flat out white.
Yep. And so there's a thing called filters in scale modeling, which is kind of like with in cinematography, right? Like if you do a blue filter, everything looks blue, right? It's literally you pop a wash on the whole thing because you want the whole thing to have a blue tinge or a brown tinge, whatever filter color you're looking for. And I realized that was the way I was using washes, is I was using it for the cracks, but I was also painting ahead of time with the thought process that I was going to do a filter, and then I would highlight on top of that. So like I would do my base coats, I would do just my blocking it of my base colors. I wash everything, and then anything I don't want it to have that filter on, I go back with that base color over it, then I build my highlights.
Okay.
That's one technique. I go from dark to light. Some people do light to dark, where you paint everything up, and then you come back through with, like, again, a really, really, really fine brush. You dip it in your wash, and you just drag it down the crack of the cloak, or you just dab it in the underarm, wherever the crack is that you're looking to darken. And on that note, I talked last time about Vallejo and Citadel, but I think I mentioned Tamiya a little bit. I may not have fully. They do a lot of scale modeling, but they also make like paints and stuff. All their paints are acrylics. They also do some enamels, but they're very much how do I word it? Not more finagly, but there is a little bit more to them than just putting it in a in your palette and slapping it on. Like there's a little bit more cognizance that has to go to them. But they have these things, they literally call them panel line accent colors. And they are these washes that are a very nice ink wash, but the cap comes with an applicator brush on the inside of the cap. And it's a very, very fine, like a triple O brush that you then can just touch onto a detail. And the way they formulate their accent colors, it by capillary action will only hug whatever crevice, crease, panel, sharp edge that you're looking at. And then if you do go over there, you can just take basic enamel thinner and dip a cotton bud in it, touch the edge of it, boom, you're good to go, and you've cleaned it up.
Wow.
And that's another way that you can clean them up. If you get a pool and it has dried, you can get an acrylic thinner, dip a cotton bud in that, and just roll it. Don't rub it, don't push it, but just roll it over there, and you'll start to pick up some of that excess. I'm sitting here doing the motion like you guys can see it.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna happen. Visual medium.
Yeah, eventually I will remember we are doing audio only one of these days.
It hasn't happened in 100 episodes.
It's not gonna.
I said one of these days. It might be 1,001, but
one of these days.
But yeah, that is one thing you can do if you've created a pool of a wash that you didn't want. Is that you can soak it up either immediately when it's down there by like a cotton bud or a piece of paper towel. You can clean it up with whatever thinner you need to, or you can then slap it all over the model and make it a filter, and then go back on top of that and highlight back up to whatever color you want.
Actually, speaking of highlighting and getting back up there and jelly-filled glazed donuts, so the other thing I was actually very interested in, and I have an idea of it, but you might have more specifics on it since I've never really gone out of my way to ask, other than these are obviously very talented artists working on these minis. Are there any specific techniques that you are aware of that you'll see, like the minis, the ones that are put on display that are done immensely well by like obviously professional painters with very professional skills, and they've been doing these for years and whatnot? But you get some of the stuff that they do on minis where like you'll see gradient textures and they will go over them and allow for even like even effects of where like I linked this a while back where they can even make something glow and it's all done just through paint. It's not done through that. Is it easier to do this with by doing like a spray? Uh or is this something that artists actually go out of their way to just do brushstroke by brushstroke?
So there's three main ways that you can achieve that, and most techniques will fall under one of these three ways. And it's really hard to say which one's easiest, just because as an artist in general, and when you're painting miniatures, make no doubt it's an art form. there's going to be techniques that are easier for you that aren't necessarily easier for everybody. So saying something's easier isn't a across the board flat statement.
Right.
But so the first one is obviously using an airbrush. Airbrush is the easiest way to achieve a really nice, clean, good-looking gradient. But airbrushes are expensive. Airbrushes take effort to clean. Airbrushes take effort to learn how to use nicely. You have to have a compressor. You have to learn the air pressure you're putting through it, and are you using single action or dual action? So there's a lot of granularity there, but it is easier than the other two major ways to do it. And a lot of times when you see them, you will see that they're done by airbrush, but airbrush is kind of easy to pick out because it's very feathered, for lack of a better term. The edges they're not as nicely blended as much as they are fading into each other. I don't know if that totally makes sense.
Yeah, my friend swears by it for his base coating for like speed painting. He just he'll prime his minis and then he'll literally just airbrush the entire model in the base coat that he wants, and then go from there.
If you're doing it that way, like it's like spray painting, but you have a better control over it. If you're just
exactly
doing flat colors, sure, but talking about gradients specifically, I think that's where Meta's question was.
Yeah,
wet blending, man.
So that's number 2 is wet blending. And I'll get to that in a minute because the other one is kind of a step up into wet blending, and that is doing many shades of light, or many light coats of color. So you slap everything down in the base color, and then you add just like a drop of whatever your gradient is going towards, and then you do a whole thing in that, just stopping just shy of the edge, and you just very granularly keep adding that color until finally you get to where you want it to.
See the picture I posted in Discord.
Yeah, and you can do it that way, and that way does work, but that way takes a lot of work.
I don't like doing that.
That sounds like a lot.
I think it looks better, but
it's a lot of effort. But it's also like it can be easier, but it can also easily become where you start to see what is the term? There's a term in pixel art for like the same effect, but essentially you'll start to see bands, right? Like you'll see a band of one color, and then a band of the next one, and a band of the next one, and it doesn't fully blend. Now, when you're playing war games on table and you're standing 3-4 feet away, your eyes are not processing those bands.
Oh no, they're not. No, they're not.
But again, we're talking, if you're looking at you're holding the miniature, you're looking it over, like, oh wow, you painted this. Oh, that looks up. That it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, the way you paint for like a fancy display unit versus a tabletop unit are going to be vastly different.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
So the final way to do it, and this is the way that I try to do it, is it's called wet blending. And wet blending is a little bit easier to do with enamel paints than acrylics because of the speed at which acrylics dry. But if you've put enough retardant into them, you don't have to worry about it drying too fast. And what it is you will paint your whatever color is the base color, and then whatever color you want it to eventually gradiate to on top of that while it's still wet. And then at the edges of where they meet, you will then take your brush and try to blend those two wet colors as if you were mixing a color on your palette. And by doing so, you can not only get yourself a nice gradient, but if the whatever ridges are uneven, if it's not just like a sine wave, but it's also, at a different angle and a different altitude and all these different things, you can get that gradient really, really nice to a level that you can't do it on with the banding or even an airbrush. That being said, it's really easy to just turn the whole thing into a medium tone between those two colors.
So
you have to be very careful about how you're blending the middle of the road between the two.
So how do you be careful? That's the real question here. How do you be careful?
The way that I do it,
let me tell you how I'm imagining it first, just so that you should understand like where I'm coming from. So like we're talking basic, like person just takes brush and like just kind of runs it across the matching point between them, or is there like certain stroke techniques you need to use, like that kind of thing?
So what I do is I take the piece and I slap down whatever color I want the darker color to be. Again, I work dark to light. If you're working light to dark, you can do a lighter color first, but lighter is easier to paint on dark than, or sorry, dark is easier to paint on light than light is on dark. So it's, if you mess up, you'll have to do more work. But anyway, so I will paint the whole thing in the darker color. Then I will take the lighter color and I'll go over it in a slightly thinner coat, but I will actually make it a little bit more thin. And then I will paint almost the entire thing in that color until I get to because again, right, like when you're doing these gradients, you only want a small area to actually have the gradient. The gradient isn't going to be 90% of the area. It's going to be a very small point. So I paint most of it in that area, and I leave the last, little strip of that first coat that I did. And if it's dried by now, I'll actually go back and I'll plop, just a very short, very quick line of that so it's wet and it's kind of reactivated the layer beneath it. And then I will just take my double or triple aught brush and put it at where the two kind of ridges of paint meet, for lack of a better term, and just kind of jiggle it back and forth like a feathering action. And I'll just keep going up and down, up and down, up and down until it's nicely blended. But I'm only moving it maybe half of a brush width in each direction, right? So it's only just a little bit of a movement. And that's enough to pull both of them together, but I'm not ruining the one color on the left, and I'm not ruining the color on the right. It's a little bit hard to say specifically how much goes down for each one, just because it's different per material, it's different per effect you're trying to achieve, depending on the angles are. You have to pick out where is the highlight going to be, where is the shadows going to be, but you find where those two extremes very specifically are, the darkest point of the shadow and the brightest point of the highlight, and you make sure those are never touched by this feathering thing. And then you just kind of go back and forth. And the nice thing about wet blending is you can just keep doing it. And if it starts to dry on you, if you're using acrylic paint, dip your brush in some water and keep going at it. And that water will reactivate the acrylic as long as it's not fully cured, which acrylics take about 15 to 45 minutes to fully cure. They may dry, but they're not fully cured. And if you drop water on them in that meantime, you can then kind of reactivate them and continue to blend them. If they do dry, just drop the original color back on that darkest or that brightest spot and continue blending. And that's what that's all that wet blending is. If you do very, very thin coats as you do so, it allows you to go back many times without losing your detail. That being said, it is very labor intensive compared to the other two options, because you're doing that blending, you're going back. It does do a good bit of going back and forth until you get the effect the way you want it, but it's not going to have banding, it's not going to have spackling, it's not going to have that feathering that you get from the airbrush. It's going to be a very nice gradient. And it's because you're literally, when you if you're mixing paints on your palette to get a color you want, that's just what you're doing on your model, and you're allowing the two to blend together.
Right. That is a lot of work to do that kind of thing.
It is. It is. Yeah, I was gonna say it's a lot to describe it, but it's a lot to describe it in the way that it's a lot to describe how to make it. Yeah. On wet blending, and I mean, it's like creating a character in any RPG, right? You try to explain it to anybody on face value, and
it's like a lot, yeah.
And then you just put the book in front of them, and they make it in 20 minutes. They're like, "Oh, that wasn't that bad."
No, it's not that bad at all. It's really funny though. You say it's like, don't worry, once you do it enough. I'm like, I don't know, man. I've been doing base coats a lot, and every time I start back up, I forget everything. I forget how to do I forget to do washes. I don't even remember how to do highlights. And then I found out there were glazes on it, and I was like, my God, I can put a protective layer on these things. There's different types. No, I didn't get it for this. What happened to just painting it?
The problem is that you let too much time go between your painting.
I do. I know. What, you're trying to tell me that 2 years between paint jobs might be too long? I might not retain that knowledge.
Well, only 2 years. Okay, that might just be. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Only 2 years. All right.
No,
God.
but like it's like any other art form, right? Like the
Yeah.
more you do it,
The more you do it, the better it's gonna be. The easier it's gonna become. It's
Yeah,
practice makes perfect.
But you can go walk away from it for half a year and come back, and even if you conceptually know it, it takes a little bit to kind of remind your hand muscles how to do it. I have a few BattleTech miniatures that I'm looking at right now that can very much be shown as archetypical pieces to what I'm talking about.
Also, let me rephrase that and say perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah, practice makes permanent. Practice does not make perfect.
Yeah, that's true. Should say if we rephrase that. I don't know if you guys have any questions, but otherwise I'm gonna ask about highlighting next because it's a good reminder for me, if nothing else.
You got
I learned by
5
doing.
minutes.
Yeah.
He's got 5 minutes. No, he doesn't. He started
No, I'm just gonna take all of your time, Obs.
Okay, I mean that's fine.
So with highlighting, again, there's kind of different ways you can do this wet blending, techniques and whatever.
Let me ask you this: what's the most beginner-friendly one? Not based on the fact that like it's gonna be different for different people. Like, what is in general? What would be the go-to?
one that I like that for speed and efficacy on the table to get your units there so you can start playing is a combination of washes and edge highlights. So essentially, paint your model the color, your base colors. Slap your wash on it so it goes into the shadows. As I said, it'll give you a bit of a filter over everything, but then go back with your base color, hit the centers of all the panels, or towards the whatever light source, wherever you're imagining the light to come from. Usually it's above, but it might differ. Hit your original color on most of the panels there without going into the shadows, and then take that color, put a little bit of either white or just a lighter version of that color in general into it, mix it together, take your thinnest brush you can, fill it up with a little bit of that, and then, how do I describe this?
Here we go.
If you were to imagine, like, let's say it's a 90-degree angle, right, that you're trying to get to. Turn it so that way it's pointing straight up in the air. So it's like a triangle going. The point is going in the air, and at that point, take your brush that's now loaded with your highlight color and drag it 90 degrees to that point. You're not touching the point of your brush to the point of where you want the edge highlight. You're actually going perpendicular to the vertice of that panel or whatever, and you're just hitting the edge of the panel, the edge of the curve, the edge of the whatever it is, to get that really bright glint of the sun or the whatever light source hitting it. And that's what's called an edge highlight. You're highlighting in a starkly brighter color the very edge of the thing, right up against the shadow. And that's the simplest, easiest way to do it. Slap it with base coat, slap it with a wash, base coat on the flat areas, edge highlight on the very edges. Boom.
Dang.
And I'll send Ob some pictures of edge highlights. Hopefully he'll actually remember to include them in the YouTube thing. If people
Remember or ignore?
Right.
I can't promise that they will transition between them, but at least one will end up on the YouTube video.
At least one. It's going to be the only one, and I'm going to be like, no, not that one.
It's like the worst one. It's not even having.
Let's see. Let's play a game, Tets. Post multiple ones, and we'll see if I post the worst one.
What is this, Russian roulette, but for like pictures?
Saw, if you will.
You want to play a game? Like that's what I'm getting from this.
I don't want to play this game anymore. I don't like it.
Sword Art Online.
You know what's a really good game though?
There you go. I posted one in the Discord right now. So by seeing this, you should see what I mean by an edge highlight.
You got to give me 1080 by 720 at least.
At least 10.
Yeah, the resolution is.
It was on my cell phone that has bacon grease on the camera lens. Okay, let it alone.
You know what? I got questions about that, but I feel like that's for a different time and a different place.
No, go ahead. We'll take up all the time. Go for it.
No.